Post-Lux Tenebras, After Light Darkness. The aim of these pictures is to illustrate the bemusement and frustration that I feel about the current state of political idiocy. I am vexed at the disconnect between the profundity of humanity's accumulated knowledge and the disturbingly obtuse decisions being made which exhibit a blatant ignorance of this wisdom and a crowing avoidance of the skills required to make informed choices. I chose to start with the ancient Greeks, as their investigations of the internal and external world underpin our mathematics, art, philosophy, architecture and literature, to name a few. This knowledge was lost to the Western world following the rise of Christianity and the demise of the Roman Empire. To me, there are parallels between that era and the present-day struggles between knowledge and populism. The ancient Greeks and their gods. Although ancient Greek mythology is as complex and bonkers as any religion, its imagery serves to illustrate the grand sweep of Greek ideas, subsequently destroyed, left to collapse into ruins, or where useful, assimilated into Christianity. Zeus is his Roman counterpart Jove, segued into Jehovah, and during the Renaissance the adoption of his magnificent looks gave us our recognisable version of God in heaven with his flowing locks, bearded chops and brawny chest. Beauty. Chunky Zeus was pretty fruitful, and Apollo is one of his many offspring. When one of his conquests, Leto, became pregnant with his twins, his wife Hera's curse prevented Leto from giving birth on the earth, so she found the secret floating island of Delos and produced Apollo and Artemis. Apollo was fed nectar and ambrosia, so grew to a full-sized god in one day. He is seen as the most beautiful god and the template for the ideal, beardless, athletic youth. The ideal youth. Kuroi represent gods or male youths. Life-size or taller, they were public memorials or offerings to temples, oracles and sanctuaries. They are the ideal of beauty, piety, honour and sacrifice. Nudity was an initial difference between early Greek and Egyptian male figures, but the aim of representing motion was to widen that gap. Within a few decades, the more realistic Kuros for the fallen warrior, Croesus, strides forward, and the later bronze Piraeus Apollo shows knowledge of anatomy with even more freedom of movement. Unlike earlier stone statues, he was designed to be seen in the round, and round he is. Large-scale bronze sculptures were made possible by the development of the lost wax method, so-called not because we haven't got a clue as to how the Greeks managed to do this, but because during the process, wax is melted out of a mould or lost as the hot liquid bronze is poured in, creating a hollow shell of bronze much lighter than a solid object. The artistic benefit is that bronze has much greater tensile strength than stone, so you can move limbs away from the side of the body, as can be seen with Apollo's extended hands. If you ever wondered, and I'm sure you have spent sleepless nights over this, why those Roman marble copies of Greek statues are always propped up with a handy tree trunk, it's to prevent their limbs from falling on some poor, unsuspecting Roman admirer. Introducing Contrapposto. Critias Boy was cited by Kenneth Clark as the first beautiful nude in art, and who could disagree with that? It's probably a copy of a bronze which hasn't survived. Due to the Romans' propensity for turning Greek bronze statues into swords, there are very few originals left, and most of what we think of as Greek statuary are Roman marble copies. Even in these, as well as in the bronzes that escaped the Romans' forges, the investigation and observation of nature, the artistic realization of this, and the technical skills of the Greek sculptors are quite breathtaking. The sculptor appears to have a clear anatomical understanding of how the body acts as a system. With the straight left leg, the right one bending at the knee, sets off a chain of events where his pelvis is pushed diagonally upwards on the left. The right buttock relaxes, the spine curves into an S shape, so the left shoulder dips. This stance is called contrapposto, and he is the first statue that we know of which demonstrates this. As a teenager in Florence at the end of the 15th century, Michelangelo was invited by Lorenzo the Magnificent to study the Medici family collection of ancient sculpture. You can see how Michelangelo used the Greek ideal as a model for David. I just got to go to the cast courts at the V&A. And just in case you were wondering, that ridge of bone at the hip is the iliac crest, and the furrow dipping between the two is sometimes known as Apollo's belt and is a sign of a well-honed athletic gym bod familiar to you all. From God to Mortal. These taller-than-life bronze warriors were found in the sea in 1972 near the southern Italian town of Hypatia, when the left arm of one of the statues emerged from the sand under the water. It was first thought to be a dead body, but on touching the arm, the intrepid discoverer pretty soon realised it was made of bronze. You can see how the contrapposto stance and their turned heads add to the sense of movement. Their muscles are well defined, albeit somewhat idealised, and the polished bronze would have glowed just like the oiled skin of those athletes who train naked in the southern sun. With eyes of bone and glass, silver teeth and copper lips and nipples, the aim of a greater physical realism, although still idealised, becomes apparent. Bronzed beauty. In fact, when it comes to beauty in bronze, little surpasses Donatello's David, the first freestanding bronze nude since antiquity, commissioned for the courtyard of the Palazzo Medici in Florence in 1430 by Cosimo de' Medici, the foremost art patron of the era. Just a small reminder of why we might want to be part of European culture. Getting him in proportion. Doryphorus, the spear carrier, is a marble copy of a lost bronze made between 450 to 400 BCE by Polyclitus, and is a prime example of his canon or rule of the mathematical proportions of the human form, with each part bearing a mathematical relationship to the next, starting from the smallest bone of a little finger. The canon also proposes sculpting the figure in a dynamic counterbalance between relaxed and tense body parts, and between the directions in which the parts move, a concept called symmetria, and Polyclitus's statues of young athletes were the best demonstration of his principles. He also proposed the ideal ratio of head to body size as 1:7. In later Greek sculpture, this changes to 1:8, and 8.5 is the so-called hero proportion. Anyhow, here are some contemporary models of Polyclitus's canon, and you can decide for yourselves. He-Man. Polyclitus's idea of relating beauty to ratio was later summarized by the Greek physician and philosopher Galen, writing in the 2nd century. Beauty consists in the proportions, not of the elements, but of the parts, that is to say, of finger to finger, and of all the fingers to the palm and the wrist, and of these to the forearm, and of the forearm to the upper arm, and of all other parts to each other. A bit tough if your fingers get snapped off, though. That epitome of Renaissance man Leonardo da Vinci believed that the ideal human proportions were determined by the harmonious proportions that governed the universe, so the ideal man would fit cleanly into a circle, as in his famous drawing Vitruvian Man, based on Marcus Vitruvius, the 1st century BCE Roman architect and writer. Today, according to one source, sporting governing bodies compare athletes' bodies with Greek sculpture to check abnormal muscle development achieved through the use of banned substances such as steroids. However, even the ancient Greeks weren't immune to a bit of performance enhancement. As early as 776 BCE, the Greek Olympians were reported to have used dried figs, mushrooms and strychnine to perform better. What they performed better, heaven only knows. Depicting women. The female equivalent of the kouros, the kore, was always clothed, as were early statues of goddesses. However, the end of the 5th century BCE saw a new style of sculpture, with clinging garments which allowed the female form to be seen, called unimaginatively wet drapery style, a bit wet t-shirt. This means that restrictions around exposing the naked female body were close to being circumvented. This was a vital precursor to the sculptor Praxiteles' famous statue of a nude Aphrodite, the Roman Venus, the first of its kind and the first of very, very many which followed. Venus envy. Considering that she was a goddess who embodied love, sexuality, beauty and femininity, Aphrodite had never been depicted nude in ancient Greek art prior to the mid-4th century BCE. According to Pliny, the sculptor Praxiteles received a commission from the citizens of Kos for a statue of Aphrodite for their temple. He created 2 versions, one draped, the other nude. The shocked citizens of Kos rejected the nude statue in favour of the draped one, of which there are no further accounts. The rejected nude, however, was sagaciously purchased by the citizens of Cnidos and set up in their open-air temple, visible in the round, where it quickly became one of the most famous works by Praxiteles. Aphrodite was sculpted preparing for the ritual bath that restored her purity, discarding her drapery with one hand while modestly shielding herself with the other. The statue was much admired for its beauty, even, as records tell us, inciting a youthful night intruder to the heights of lust, famous, you could say, for leaving his mark. In his ensuing shame, he jumped off a cliff. What a twit. The original was lost in a fire in Constantinople in 475, but by then many copies and variants had already been made. Everyone wanted her. Colour me Venus, the Lely Venus. Venus green, Venus pink, Venus yellow, Venus orange. Harmony of the spheres. As the ancient Greeks used maths in art and saw harmony in the cosmos, this drawing illustrates the intersection of the two. Proposition 1. To understand how the Greeks developed their ideas requires an awareness of basic maths. I've used Euclid and his elementary elements for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because his book, Elements, contains the basis for the maths still taught today, and secondly, because Proposition 1, making an equilateral triangle, is A. easy to understand, B. easy to do, C. easy to illustrate, and D. beautiful. Proposition 1. To construct an equilateral triangle on a given finite straight line. You have compass, you have ruler, you have rules. Here are the rules as translated by me. You start with a straight line AB. You're going to make an equilateral triangle using AB as the base. Draw a circle with its centre at A and its radius AB. Call its circle BCD. Draw a second circle with its centre at B and its radius BA. Call this one ACE. Point C is one of the 2 points where the circles intersect. From this point C, draw a straight line to A and another to B. As point A is the centre of the circle CDB, AC equals AB, as they are both the radius of the circle CDB. Similarly, as point B is the centre of the circle CAE, BC equals BA. You have just proved that AC is equal to AB. This means that both the straight lines AC and BC equal AB. Things which equal the same thing must also equal one another, so AC also equals BC. Therefore, the three straight lines, AC, AB, and BC, all equal one another. Therefore, the triangle ABC is equilateral, which you constructed from the finite straight line AB. Voila! Good as gold. In the early 1900s, mathematician, engineer, physicist and inventor Mark Barr proposed using phi, the first letter of the name Phidias, another mega-famous Greek sculptor, to symbolize the golden ratio. It was commonly accepted at the time that Phidias had used it in his works, albeit that Barr himself didn't think that this was the case. What is the golden ratio, I hear you ask? It's the dividing point on a line which we'll call A, where the ratio of the whole line A to the longer segment B is the same as the longer segment B to the shorter segment C. This gives the ratio of 1.618033988875, or as we mortals call it, approximately 1.618. So A is to B as B is to C. Simples. Sorry. This is also called the golden mean and the golden section. In German, goldener Schnitt. The golden ratio gives us the relative lengths of the side of a golden rectangle. The golden rectangle is where the ratio of the longest side to the shortest side is 1.618. It's credited as being instinctively harmonious and has been used in art and architecture to give pleasing proportions in composition and dimension. Constructing the golden rectangle. So how do you know where to divide a line to find the golden mean without having to measure or calculate anything? Magic again, compass and ruler again, or as we call it, maths. Start with a square. Find the midpoint of the base of your square. Draw a diagonal to either top corner of the square. Get your trusty compass and put the point at the base midline mark, pencil in the top corner. Draw an arc from the corner down past the line the square sits on. Extend the baseline of the square until it meets the arc. This is the bottom right corner of your golden rectangle. The bottom right corner of the square is at the division of the golden mean. The height of the shortest side of the rectangle is the same as the base of the square, a square being square. That's what it is. So just redraw the new rectangle from that edge. That's it. The Fibonacci sequence. Golden rectangles can be divided to create a square and another golden rectangle, and another square, another golden rectangle, square, golden rectangle, and so on. The Fibonacci sequence is where the next number is found by adding up the two numbers before it. 1, 1, so 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, 8 plus 5 is 13, 13 plus 8 is 21, 21 plus 13 is 34, and 34 plus 21 is 55, and so on. The ratio of two consecutive Fibonacci numbers tends to the golden ratio as the numbers increase. Starting from the smallest division, where that area equals 1 squared, the areas of the golden rectangle increase by the Fibonacci sequence: 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 5 squared, and so on. So what, you may be thinking? Nature, that's what. Many arrangements of petals, leaves, seeds, or other parts of plants that grow in a circular arrangement do so in the Fibonacci sequence. If you want to know the maths, be thankful for those clever folk who made the internet, or books, or vellum. Where be atoms? In the 5th century BCE, it is thought that the Greek philosopher Leucippus theorized that everything is composed entirely of imperishable, indivisible elements, which he called atoms, atomon being Greek for indivisible. It's his pupil Democritus who is primarily remembered today for his formulation of an atomic theory of the universe. He posited that the universe was originally composed of nothing but tiny atoms churning in chaos, until they collided together to form larger units, including the Earth and everything on it. He theorized that there is only empty space between atoms, otherwise there couldn't be this movement, that atoms have always been and always will be in motion, and that there is an infinite number of atoms and kinds of atoms, which differ in shape and size. Changes in matter were a result of dissociations or combinations of the atoms as they moved through the void. According to Democritus, the knowledge of truth is difficult, since perception through the senses is subjective, so truth cannot be judged through sensual impressions alone, but must be interpreted through the intellect. He described it thus: by convention, sweet is sweet, bitter is bitter, hot is hot, cold is cold, colour is colour. But in reality there are atoms and the void. That is, the objects of sense are supposed to be real, and it is customary to regard them as such, but in truth they are not. Only the atoms and the void are real. Of truth we know nothing, for truth is in a well. Atomists attempted to explain the world without reasoning as to purpose, prime mover, or final cause, so questions of physics should be answered with a mechanistic explanation, What earlier circumstances caused this event? Their opponents, however, included the question, what purpose did this event serve? No wonder Democritus is usually represented as laughing. Needless to say, Plato wanted to burn all his books. What a killjoy. Of course, now we theorize that atoms are comprised of subatomic particles, which are not themselves composed of other particles. Those Greeks came pretty close, though. Non fui, non sum, non curo. Epicurus, 341 to 270 BCE. Epicurus derived much of his physics and cosmology from Democritus, so unsurprisingly he turned against Platonism and its archetypal ideals. He established a school which women were allowed to join, where he taught that the purpose of philosophy was to attain a happy, tranquil life, characterized by ataraxia, peace and freedom from fear, and aponia, the absence of pain, by living a self-sufficient life surrounded by friends. Okay, maybe not everyone's cup of tea, especially as he advocated cheese. Win some, lose some. Importantly, though, he maintained that as death is the end of existence, terrifying stories of punishment in the afterlife are ridiculous superstitions, therefore death is nothing to be feared. Accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us, for good and evil imply sentience, and death is the privation of all sentience. Death, therefore, the most awful of all evils, is nothing to us, seeing that when we are, death is not come, and when death is come, we are not. Unanswered questions. He maintained that people would still behave ethically because amoral behaviour will burden them with guilt and prevent them from attaining ataraxia. There are some people for whom this is clearly not an issue, and in these cases I really would like to believe in the afterlife. Epicurus's trilemma on the problem of evil was neatly summed up by David Hume in 1779 in his Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. Epicurus's old questions are yet unanswered. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then is he malevolent? Is he both able and willing? Whence then is evil? The swerve. Democritus had described atoms as eternally flying through space, colliding, coalescing, and separating from each other as necessary. Epicurus deviated from Democritus in his theory of atomic swerve, in which atoms may unpredictably deviate from their expected course. His reason for introducing this was to preserve the concepts of free will and ethical responsibility, while still maintaining the deterministic physical model of atomism. In the poem De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, the 1st century Roman poet Lucretius explained the existence of atoms as tiny, imperceptible particles as a matter of empirical observation, citing as evidence the gradual wearing down of rings from being worn, statues from being kissed, stones from being dripped on by water, and roads from being walked on. He then described the swerve as such. It is this slight deviation of primal bodies, at intermediate times and places, which keeps the mind as such from experiencing an inner compulsion in doing everything it does and from being forced to endure and suffer like a captive in chains. If they were not in the habit of swerving, they would all fall straight down through the depths of the void, like drops of rain, and no collision would occur, nor would any blow be produced among the atoms. In that case, nature would never have produced anything. Epicurism died out following the rise of Christianity. His teachings gradually became known in the 15th century, but his ideas did not become acceptable until the 17th century, after which his influence grew considerably, profoundly impacting the ideas of major thinkers, including Karl Marx, who wrote his PhD thesis on the difference between Democritean and Epicurean philosophy of nature. For a simpler but equally entertaining read, I'd recommend The Swerve, How the World Became Modern by Stephen Greenblatt, first published in 2011. It's a narrative of the discovery of De Rerum Natura by the 15th century papal scribe Poggio Branciolini. Greenblatt analyses the poem's subsequent impact on the development of the Renaissance, the Reformation, and modern science. The Romans. 3 things that the Romans did for us. They invented the arch, they made multiple copies of Greek sculptures, they introduced Christianity. Oh yes. Born-again Constantine. Constantine was the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity, which he did on his deathbed in 337, having previously issued the Edict of Milan in 313, which declared tolerance for Christianity. Before that, Christians had done their level best to get themselves killed by the Romans in a number of gruesome ways in the name of Jesus, because that's what he would have wanted. It has been suggested that the exaggerated size and faraway look in the eyes of his giant statue was to show his transcendence above the mortal realm. To quote this extract from Wiki, Constantine is enthroned in this great public work in unapproachable grandeur, like the effigy of a god, although he is really intended to reflect the Christian deity. According to the art historian Michael Grant, here was the man at whose court writers felt it appropriate to speak of the divine face and sacred countenance. The sculptor has conceived this countenance as a holy mask, an overpowering cult object, resembling, though on a far greater scale, the icons of future Byzantium, an idol animated with a divine presence and with the power to repel the demons lurking in pagan images. The Arch of Constantine in Rome is of a traditional style, yet exemplifies the ideological and stylistic changes of his reign. Many of the decorative elements are spolia, repurposed building material. Conquering emperors are evident throughout, but the new carvings created for the arch are quite different. Whereas the earlier sculptures show the naturalism and figurative accuracy that the Romans learnt from the Greeks, the new artworks are flatter and simplified, more graphic than representational. It has been proposed that this simplification could be either to make Constantine's story easier to read from ground level, or that as the skills of the Greeks ebbed away, later Roman sculptors were not able to emulate their finesse. Although Christian art progressed as a continuation of the Roman, there was a shift from 3 to 2-dimensional representation, as the perfect material body became less important to Christians than the ephemeral spirit. By Jove, he's pissed off. With the rise of Christianity, the knowledge and art of the Greeks and Romans was superseded in the West in favour of this latest cult, where investigation of the real world was supplanted by questions of whether a father could be his own son, who himself was born of a virgin mother. No wonder Jove looks so angry. Hypatia, born between 350 and 370 CE. Hypatia, Hypatia, however you want to pronounce her name, was a 5th century Alexandrian Greek woman who was a philosopher, mathematician, astronomer, and maker of scientific instruments, famous in her time as a teacher to pagans and Christians alike, and an advisor to the Alexandrian political elite. Contemporaneous records state that she excelled her father in mathematics, and like her father, she was also an extraordinarily talented astronomer. Apparently, she was also exceedingly beautiful and fair of form, which was a good excuse to cast Rachel Weisz as her in the film Agora, forgiven by some for its artistic license with the truth. When one of the men who came to her lectures persisted in chatting her up, she politely tried to fob him off by playing the lyre, which apparently didn't work for him. When he refused to take no for an answer, she rejected him outright, showing him her bloody menstrual cloths, whilst philosophizing neatly, saying, "This is what you really love, my young man, but you do not love beauty for its own sake." In Platonic terms, that means that he should be loving the abstract ideal of beauty rather than its physical manifestation in her womanliness. Anyhow, apparently the young man was so traumatized by the sight of blood that his desire for her instantly deserted him. What a lightweight. Death by Christian. In 415, she was killed by a vicious mob of fanatical Christian monks, spurred on by their bishop Cyril, who was generally a total bastard, even in his time controversially known as a monster born and educated for the destruction of the church. He was in conflict with one of Hypatia's closest allies, Orestes, the Roman prefect of Alexandria, and a recent convert to Christianity. Cyril had spread rumours that blamed Hypatia for preventing a reconciliation of the two with her well-known satanic practices and witchy pagan ways. Blazing gory. Her death was pretty gruesome, so turn away now if you are of a sensitive nature. Cyril's followers dragged her out of her chariot and into a church, stripped her, beat her, gouged out her eyeballs, scraped her flesh off with sharp-edged shells, then hacked up her body and dragged her mangled limbs through the town to a place called Cinarion, where they set them on fire, in the traditional manner in which Alexandrians carried the bodies of the vilest criminals outside the city limits to cremate them as a way of symbolically purifying the city. Cyril allegedly managed to escape serious punishment by bribing one of the emperor's officials, and by 420 was in complete control. Wherefore me too. Here today, gone tomorrow. All I can do is ask the question, quite why were Christians so antagonistic towards the material, intellectual and creative world of the Greeks? What were they so scared might be challenged? Destruction of the physical body. Set in stone. Byzantine art developed from its Roman origins, and although undeniably beautiful, was not investigative, so stylistically remained pretty static, maintained in Eastern Orthodox imagery to this day, recognizable in the iconic icon. In the Western world, the knowledge of the ancient Greeks lay dormant until the 15th century, in Florence, when Renaissance humanists, such as our friend Poggio Bracciolini, sought out texts of antiquity, which were then known to be tucked away in Europe's monastic libraries, waiting for their precious vellum to be reused for copying Christian religious texts. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans in 1453 generated a wave of émigré Greek scholars bringing precious manuscripts in ancient Greek, many of which had fallen into obscurity in the West. The investigation of the world around us began once more. As an early Greek philosopher, Protagoras, said, "Man is the measure of all things." Truth or trumpet? Unfortunately, there are powerful men taking this too literally today. For them, truth coming from the well, armed with her whip to chastise mankind, is best kept out of sight. In 1895, Jerome had painted a similar work, The Nurture of Truth Lies in a Well, having been killed by liars and actors. In a subsequent work, also called Truth Comes Out of the Well, by Edouard de Bas-Ponsin, clerical reaction is attempting to cover up the truth and pull her back into the well. To be continued.